All right. There we go. Now we have sound. That means you guys probably weren't hearing me either. Technical difficulties, gotta love them. Okay, so what I was saying was, sorry about missing last week, was a bit under the weather. So hopefully I haven't lost too many details of where I was or what I was doing. So we were in volume 2, we're picking up with chapter 4. Chapter 4. There was one point which Anne, on returning to her family, would have been more thankful to ascertain, even that Mr. Elliot's being in love with Elizabeth, which was her father's not being in love with Mrs. Clay, and she was very far from easy about it, when she had been home a few hours. Okay, I'm going to try that one again. There was one point which Anne, on returning to her family, would have been more thankful to ascertain, even than Mr. Elliot's being in love with Elizabeth, which was her father's not being in love with Mrs. Clay, which she was very far from easy about, when she had been at home a few hours. On going down to breakfast the next morning, she found there had just been a decent pretense on the lady's side of meaning to leave them. She could imagine Mrs. Clay to have said that now Miss Elliot was come, she could not suppose herself at all wanted, for Elizabeth was replying, in a sort of whisper, "That must not be any reason indeed. I assure you I feel it none. This is nothing. She is nothing to me compared with you." And she was in full time to hear her father say, "My dear madam, this must not be. As yet, you have seen nothing of Bath. You have been here only to be useful. You must, you must not run away from us now. You must stay to be acquainted with Mrs. Wallace, the beautiful Mrs. Wallace. To your fine mind, I will know the sight. To your fine mind, I will know the sight of beauty is a real gratification." He spoke and looked so much in earnest that Anne was not surprised to see Mrs. Clay stealing a glance at Elizabeth and herself. Her countenance, perhaps, might express some watchfulness, but the praise of the fine mind did not appear to excite a thought in the but the praise of the fine mind did not appear to excite a thought in her sister. The lady could not but yield to such joint entreaties, and promised to stay. The lady could but The lady could not but yield to such joint entreaties, and promised to stay. In the course of the same morning, Anne and her father, chancing to be alone together, he began to compliment her on her improved looks. He thought her less thin in her person, and her cheeks, her skin, her complexion greatly improved, clearer, fresher. Had she been using anything in particular? No, nothing. Merrily Gowland, he supposed. No, nothing at all. Ha! He was surprised at that, and added, "Certainly, you cannot do better than continue as you are, and you cannot be better than well, or I should recommend Gowland, the constant use of Gowland during the spring months. Mrs. Clay has been using it at my recommendation, and you see what it has done for her. You see how it has carried away her freckles. If Elizabeth could have but heard this, such personal praise might have struck her, especially as it did not appear to Anne that the freckles were all especially as it did not appear to Anne that the freckles were at all lessened. But everything must take its chance. The evil of the marriage would be much diminished if Elizabeth were also to remarry. As for herself, she might always command a home with Lady Russell. Lady Russell's compo- Lady Russell's composed mind and polite manners were put to some trial on this point, in her intercourse in Camden Place. The sight of Mrs. Clay in such favor, and of Anne so overlooked, was a perpetual provocation to her there, and vexed her as much as when she and vexed her and vexed her as much when she was away, as a person in Bath who drinks the water, gets all the new publications, and has a very large acquaintance, has time to be vexed. As Mr. Elliot became known to her, she grew more charitable, or more indifferent, towards the others. His manners were in an immediate recommendation. His manners were in an immediate recommendation, and and on conversing with him, she found the solid so fully supporting the superficial that she was at first, as she told Anne, almost ready to exclaim, "Can this be Mr. Elliot?" and could not seriously picture to herself a more agreeable or as and could not seriously picture to herself a more agreeable or estimable man. Everything united in him: good understanding, correct opinions, knowledge of the world, and a warm heart. He had strong feelings of family attachment and family honor, and without pride or weakness. He lived with the liberality. He lived with the liberality of a man of fortune, without display. He judged for himself in everything essential, without defying public opinion in any point of worldly decorum. He was steady, observant, moderate, candid, never run away with by spirits or by selfishness, which fancied itself strong feeling, and yet, with a sensibility to what was amiable and lovely, and a value for all the felicities, and a value for all the felicities of domestic life, which characters of fancied enthusiasm and violent agitation seldom really possess. She was sure that he had not been happy in marriage. Colonel Wallace said it, and Lady Russell saw it, but it had been no unhappiness to sour his mind, nor, she began pretty soon to suspect, to prevent his thinking of a second choice. Her satisfaction in Mr. Elliot outweighed all the plague of Mrs. Clay. It was now some years since Anne had begun to learn that she and her excellent friend could sometimes think differently, and it did not surprise her, therefore, the Lady Russell should see nothing suspicious or inconsistent, nothing to require more motive, nothing to require more motives than appeared in Mr. Elliot's great desire of a reconciliation. In Lady Russell's view, it was perfectly natural that Mr. Elliot, at a mature time of life, should feel it a most desirable object, and what would generally recommend him, among all sensible people, to be on good terms with the head of his family. The simple process in the world of time upon a head the simple process in the world of time upon a head naturally clear, and only erring in the heyday of youth. Anne presumed, however, still to smile about it, and at last to mention Elizabeth. Lady Russell listened, and looked, and made only this cautious reply: "Elizabeth? Very well, time will explain." It was a reference to the future, which Anne, after a little observation, felt she must submit to. felt she must submit to. She could determine nothing at present. In that house, Elizabeth must be first, and she was in the habit of such generous observance of Miss Elliot that any particularity of attention seemed almost impossible. Mr. Elliot, too, it must be remembered, had not been a widower 7 months. A little delay on his side might be very excusable. In fact, Anne could never see the crape around his hat without fearing that she was the inexcusable one, and attributing to him such imaginations. For though his marriage had not been very happy, still it had existed so many years that she could not comprehend a very rapid recovery from the awful impression of it being dissolved. However it might end, he was without any question their pleasantest acquaintance in Bath. She saw nobody equal to him, and it was a great indulgence now than to talk and it was a great indulgence now and it was a great indulgence now and then to talk to him about Lyme, which he seemed to have as lively a which he seemed to have a lively a wish which he seemed to have as lively a wish to see again and to see more of as herself. They went through the particulars of their first meeting a great many times. He gave her to understand that he had looked at her with some earnestness. She knew it well, and she remembered another person's look also. They did not always think alike. His values for rank and connection she perceived to be greater than hers. It was not merely complacence, it must be a liking to the cause, which made him enter warmly into her father's and sister's solicitudes on a subject which she thought unworthy to excite them. The Bath paper one morning announced the arrival of the Dowager Viscountess Dalrymple. Dalrymple? Dowry. Hmm. Dalrymple. That is too many consonants in a row. Dalrymple. We'll try Dalrymple. The Bath paper one morning announced the Bath paper one morning announced the arrival of the Dowager Viscountess Dalrymple and her daughter, the Honorable Miss Carteret, the Honorable Miss Carteret, and all the comfort of no dash, uh, number, and all the probably number, and all the comfort of number, Camden Place, was swept away for many days, for the Dalrymples, in Anne's opinion, most unfortunately, were cousins of the Elliots, and the agony was how to introduce themselves properly. Anne had never seen her father and sister before in contact with nobility, and she must acknowledge herself disappointed. She had hoped better things from their high ideas of their own situation in life, and was reduced to form a wish which she had never foreseen, a wish that they had more pride. For our cousins Lady Dalrymple and Miss Carteret, our cousins the Dalrymples, sounded in her ears all day long. Sir Walter had once been in company with the late Viscount. Sir Walter had once been in company with the late Viscount, but had never seen any of the rest of the family. The difficulties of the case arose from there having been a suspension of all intercourse by letters of ceremony, even since the death of that said late Viscount, when, in consequence of a dangerous illness of Sir Walter's at the same time, there had been an unlucky omission at Kellynch. No letter of condolence had been sent to Ireland. The neglect had been visited on the head of the sinner, for when poor Lady Elliot died herself, no letter of con- no letter of condolence was received at Kellynch, and consequently, there was but too much reason to apprehend that the Dalrymples considered the relationship as closed. How how to have this anxious business set to rights and be admitted as cousins again was the question, and it was a question which, in a more rational manner, neither Lady Russell nor Mr. Elliot thought unimportant. Family connections are always worth preserving. Good company always worth seeking. Lady Dalrymple had taken a house for 3 months in Laura Place, and would be living in style. She had been at Bath the year before, and Lady Russell had heard her spoken as of a charming woman. It was very desirable that the connection should be renewed, if it could be done, without any compromise of propriety on the side of the Elliots. Sir Walter, however, would choose his own means, and at last wrote a very fine letter of ample explanation, regret, and entreaty to his right honourable cousin. Neither Lady Russell nor Mr. Elliot could admire the letter, but it did all that was wanted in bringing 3 lines of scrawl from the Dowager Viscountess. She was very much honoured, and should be happy in their acquaintance. The toil The toils of the business were over. The sweets began. They visited in Laura Place. They had the cards of the Dowager Viscountess Dalrymple and the Honourable Miss Carteret to be arranged whenever they might think to be arranged wherever they might be most visible, and our cousins in Laura Place, our cousins, Lady Dalrymple and Miss Carteret, were talked of to everybody. Anne was ashamed. Had Lady Dalrymple and her daughter been had Lady Dalrymple and her daughter been even try that one again. Had Lady Dalrymple and her daughter even been why am I struggling on that one? Had Lady Dalrymple and her daughter even been very agreeable, she would have still been ashamed of the agitation they created. But they were nothing. There was no superiority of manner, accomplishment, or understanding. Lady Dalrymple had acquired the name of a charming woman because she had a smile and a civil answer for everybody. Miss Carteret, with still less to say, was so plain and so awkward that she would never have been tolerated in Camden Place but for her birth. Lady Russell confessed that she had been Lady Russell confessed that she had expected something better, but yet it was an acquaintance worth having, and when Anne ventured to speak her opinion of them to Mr. Elliot, he agreed to their being nothing in themselves, but still maintained that as a family connection, as good company, as those who would collect good company around them, they had their value. Anne smiled and said, "My idea of good company, Mr. Elliot, is the company of clever, well informed people who have a great deal of conversation. That is what I call good company." "You are mistaken," he said gently. "That is not good company. That is the best. Good company requires only birth, education, and manners, and with regard to education, is not very nice. Birth, birth and good manners are essential, but a little learning is by no means a dangerous thing in good company. On the contrary, it will do very well. My cousin Anne, shake My cousin Anne shakes her head. She is not satisfied. She is fastidious. My dear cousin, sitting down by her, you have a better right to be fastidious than almost any other woman I know. But will it answer? Will it make you happy? Will it not be wiser to accept the society of these good ladies in Laura Place and enjoy all the advantages of the connection as far as possible? You may depend upon it that they will move in the first set in Bath this winter, and as rank is rank, your being known to your being known to be related to them will have its use in fixing your family, our family, let me say, in that degree of consideration which we must all wish for." "Yes," sighed Anne, "we shall indeed be known to be related to them." Then recollecting herself, and not wishing to be answered, she added, "I certainly do think there has been by far too much I certainly do think there has been I certainly do think there has been by far too much trouble taken to procure their acquaintance. I suppose," smiling, "I have more pride than any of you. But I confess it does vex me that we should be so solicitous to have the relationship acknowledged, which we may be very sure is a matter of perfect indifference to them." "Pardon me, my dear cousin. You are unjust. Pardon me, my dear cousin. You are unjust to your own claims. In London, perhaps, in your present quiet style of living, it might be as you say. But in Bath, Sir Walter Elliot and his family will always be worth knowing, always acceptable as acquaintance." "Well," said Anne, "I am I certainly am proud, too proud to enjoy a welcome which depends so entirely upon place." "I love your indignation," said he. "It is very natural. But here you are in Bath, and the object is to be establishing here with all the credit and the object is and the object is to be established here with all the credit and dignity which ought to belong to Sir Walter Elliot. You talk of being proud. I am called proud, I know, and I shall not wish to believe myself otherwise, for our pride, if investigated, would have the same object. I have no doubt. Okay. You talk of being proud. I am called proud, I know, and I shall not wish to believe myself otherwise, for our pride, if investigated, would have the same object. I have no would have the same object, I have no doubt, though the kind may seem a little different. In one point I am sure, my dear cousin, he continued, speaking lower. No, in one point, though, in one point, I am sure, my dear cousin, he continued, speaking lower, though there was no one else in the room. In one point, I am sure we must feel alike. We must feel that every addition to your father's society, among his equals or superiors, may be of use in diverging his thoughts from those who are beneath him. He looked as he spoke to the seat which Mrs. Clay had been lately occupying, a sufficient explanation of what he particularly meant. And though Anne could not believe and though Anne could not believe in their having the same sort of pride, she was pleased with him not liking she was pleased with him for not liking Mrs. Clay, and her conscience admitted that his wishing to promote her father's getting great acquaintance was more than excusable in the view of defeating her. I'm still trying to gauge if I like characters or not. I think a lot of these characters are more complex than Pride and Prejudice. Maybe I'm just, oh, maybe I'm just saying that because I have no clue what their plot progressions is yet. It's not been fully revealed. And I've read Pride and Prejudice enough times to even create caricatures of them, or there's caricatures of them made already, that I'm oversimplifying them. People also say that this was I think this was Austen's last novel. I think it's often considered her most nuanced or in-depth. I think I've heard people say, so it might just be that as well. All right, moving on. It took a bit over 20 minutes. Might have time for 3 chapters. We'll see. Chapter 5. While Sir Walter and Elizabeth were assiduously pushing their good fortune in Laura Place, Anne was renewing an acquaintance of a very different description. She had called on her former governess, and had heard from her of there being an old schoolfellow in Bath, who had the 2 strong claims of her attention, of past kindness and present suffering. Miss Hamilton, now Mrs. Smith, had shown her kindness in one of those periods of her life when it had been most valuable. Anne had gone unhappy to school, grieving for the loss of a mother whom she had dearly loved, feeling her separation from home, and suffering as a girl of 14, of strong sensibility and not high spirits. Must suffer at such a time, and Miss Hamilton, 3 years older than herself, but still from the want of near relations in a settled home, remaining another year at school, had been useful and good to her in a way which had considerably lessened her misery, and she could never be remembered with indifference. Miss Hamilton had left school, had married not long afterwards, and was said to have married a man of fortune, and this was all that Anne had known of her, till now that their governess's account brought and this was all that Anne had known of her till now that their governess's account brought her. Okay. Miss Hamilton had left school, had married not long afterwards, was said to have married a man of fortune. This was all this was all that Anne had known of her, till now their till now that their governess's account brought her situation forward in a more decided but very different form. She was a widow and poor. Her husband had been extravagant, and at his death, about 2 years before, had left his had left his affairs dreadfully involved. She had difficulties of every sort to contend with, and in addition to these distresses, had been afflicted with severe rheumatic fever, which finally settling in from her, which finally settling in her legs, had made her for had made her for the present a cripple. Had made her for the present a cripple. She had come to Bath on that account, and was now in lodgings near the hot baths, living in a very humble way, unable even to afford herself the comfort of a servant, and of course almost excluded from society. Their mutual friend answered for the satisfaction which a visit from Miss Elliot might give Mrs. Smith, and Anne therefore lost no time in going. She mentioned nothing of what she had heard, or what she attended, at home. It would excite no proper interest there. She only consulted Lady Russell, who entered thoroughly into her sentiments, and was most happy to convey her as near to Mrs. Smith's lodgings in Westgate Buildings as Anne chose to be taken. The visit was paid, their acquaintance re-established, their interest in each other more than rekindled. The first 10 minutes had its awkwardness and its emotion. 12 years were gone since they had parted, and each presented a somewhat different person from the one the other had imagined. 12 years had changed Anne from that blooming, silent, unformed girl of 15 to the elegant little woman of 7 and 20, with every beauty excepting bloom, and with manners as consciously right, consciously, and with manners as consciously right as they were invariably gentle. And 12 years had transformed the fine looking, well grown Miss Hamilton, in all the glow of health and confidence of superiority, into a poor, infirm, helpless widow, receiving the visit of her former protege as a favor. But all that was uncomfortable in the meeting that but all that was uncomfortable in the meeting had soon passed away, and left only the interesting charm of remembering former partialities, and left only the interesting charm of remembering former partialities and talking over old times. Anne found in Mrs. Smith the good sense and agreeable manners which she had almost ventured to depend on. Anne found in Mrs. Smith the good sense and agreeable manners which she had almost ventured to depend on, and a disposition to converse and to be cheerful beyond her expectation. Neither the dissipations, neither the dissipations of the past, she had lived very much in the world, nor the restrictions of the present, neither the sickness nor sorrow seemed to have closed her heart or ruined her spirit. In the course of a second visit, she talked with great openness, and Anne's astonishment increased. She could scarcely imagine a more cheerless. She could. She could scarcely imagine a more cheerless situation in itself than Mrs. Smith's. She had been very fond of her husband. She had buried him. She had been used to affluence. It was gone. She had no child to connect with her life and happiness again, no relations to assist in the arrangement of her perplexed affairs, no health to make all the rest supportable. Her accommodations were limited to a noisy parlor, a dark bedroom behind, with no possibility of moving from one to the other without assistance, which there was only one servant in the house to afford, and she never quitted the house but to be conveyed into the warm bath. Yet in spite of all of this, Anne had reason to believe that she had moments of only languor and depression, to hours Anne had reason to believe that she had only she had moments only. Anne had reason to believe that she had moments only of languor and depression, to hours of occupation and enjoyment. How could this be? She watched, observed, reflected, and finally determined that this was not a case of fortitude or of resignation only. A submissive spirit might be patient, a strong understanding would supply resolution, but here was something more. Here was that elasticity of mind, that, that disposition to be comforted, that power of return. That power of returning readily from evil to good, and of finding employment which carried her out of herself, which was from nature alone. It was the choicest gift of heaven, and Anne viewed her friend as one of those instances in which, by a merciful appointment, it seems designed to counterbalance almost every other want. There had been a time, Miss Smith told her, when her spirits had nearly failed. She could not call herself an invalid now, compared to her state on first reaching Bath. Then she had indeed been a pitiable object, for she had caught cold on the journey, and had hardly taken possession of her lodgings before she was again confined to her bed, and suffering under severe and constant pain, and all this among strangers, with the absolute necessity of having a regular nurse, and finances at that moment particularly unfit to meet any extraordinary expense. She had weathered it, however, and could truly say that it had done her good. It had increased her comforts by making her feel it increased her comforts by making her feel herself to be in good hands. She had she had seen too much of the world to expect sudden or disinterested attachment anywhere, but her illness had proved to her that the land but the illness but her illness had proved to her that her landlady had a character to preserve, and she would not use her ill. She had been particular and she had been particularly fortunate in her nurse, as a sister of her landlady, a nurse by profession, and who had always had a home in that house, when unemployed, chanced to be at liberty just in time to attend her. And she, said Mrs. Smith, besides nursing me, ooh, and she, said Mrs. Smith, besides nursing me most admirably, has really proved to be an invaluable acquaintance. As soon as I could use my hands, she taught me to knit, which has been a great amusement, and she put me in the way of making those and she put me in the way of making these little thread cases, pin cushions, and card backs, which you always find me so busy about, and which supply me with the means of doing a little good to one or two very poor families in this neighborhood. She has a very large acquaintance, of course, professionally, among those who can afford to buy, and she disposes of my merchandise. She always takes the right time for replying. Everybody's heart is open, you know, when they have recently escaped from severe pain or are recovering from the blessing of health, and Nurse Rook thoroughly understands when to speak. She is a shrewd, intelligent, sensible woman. Hers is a line for seeing human nature, and she has a fund of good sense and observation which, as a companion, makes her infinitely superior to thousands of those who, having only received the best education in the world, know nothing worth attending to. Call it gossip if you will, but when Nurse Rook has half an hour's leisure to bestow on me, she is sure to have something to relate that is entertaining and profitable, something that makes one knows one's species better. One likes to hear what is going on, to be off. Hmm, I don't know. Is that French? En fait? Well, I'm definitely gonna get that one wrong. Oh well. One likes to hear what is going on, to be afoot as to the newest modes of being trifling and silly. To me, who live so much alone, her conversation, I assure you, is a treat. Anne, far from wishing to call, far from wishing to cavil at the pleasure, replied, I can easily believe it. Women of that class have great opportunities. and if they are intelligent, may be well worth listening to. Such varieties of human nature as they are in the habit of witnessing, and it is not merely in its follies that they are well read. For they see it occasionally under every circumstance that it can for they see it occasionally under every circumstance that could be most interesting or affecting. What instances must pass before them of ardent, disinterested, self-denying attachment? Where's that one going? What what instance what instances must pass before them of ardent, disinterested, self-denying attachment, of heroism, fortitude, patience, resignation, of all the conflicts and all the sacrifices that ennoble us most. A sick chamber may often furnish the worth of volumes. Yes, said Mrs. Smith, more doubtingly. Sometimes it may, though I fear its lessons are not often in the elevated style you describe. Here and there, human nature may be great in times of trial, but generally speaking, it is its weakness and not its strength that appears in a sick chamber. It is selfishness and impatience rather than generosity and fortitude that one hears of. There is so little real friendship in the world, and unfortunately, speaking low and tremulously, speaking low and tremulously, there are so many who forget to think seriously till it is almost too late. Anne saw the misery of such feeling. The husband had not been what he ought, and the wife had been led among that part of mankind which had made her think worse of the world than she hoped it deserved. It was but a passing emotion, however, with Mrs. Smith. She shook it off, and soon added in a different tone, I do not suppose the situation my friend Mrs. Rook is in at present will furnish will furnish much either to interest or edify me. She is only nursing Mrs. Wallace of Marlborough Buildings, a mere pretty, silly, expensive fashionable woman, I believe, and of course will have nothing to report but of lace and finery. I mean to make my profit of Mrs. Wallace, however. She has plenty of money, and I attend she shall buy all the night and I attend she shall buy all the high priced things I have in hand now. Anne had called several times on her friend before the existence of such a person was known to Camden Place. At last, it became necessary to speak of her. Sir Walter, Elizabeth, and Mrs. Clay returned one morning from Laura Place with a sudden invitation from Lady Dalrymple. Dalrymple. With a sudden invitation from Lady Dalrymple for the same evening, and Anne was already engaged to spend that evening in Westgate Buildings. She was not sorry for the excuse. They were only asked, she was sure, because Lady Dalrymple, being kept at home by a bad cold, was glad to make use of the relationship which had been pressed so on her, and she declined on her own account with great alacrity. She was engaged to spend the evening with an old schoolfellow. They were not much interested in anything relative to Anne, but there still were questions enough asked to make it understood what this old schoolfellow was, and Elizabeth was disdainful and Sir Walter severe. Westgate Buildings, said he, and who is Miss Anne Elliot to be visiting in Westgate Buildings? A Mrs. Smith, a widow Mrs. Smith. And who was her husband? One of the 5,000 Mr. Smiths whose names are to be met with everywhere. And what is her attraction? That she is old and sickly? Upon my word, Miss Anne Elliot, you have the most extraordinary taste. Everything that revolts other people, low company, paltry rooms, foul air, disgusting associates are inviting to you. But surely you may put off this old lady till tomorrow. She is not so near her end, I presume, that she may hope to see another day. What is her age? 40? No, sir. She is not 1 and 30. But I do not think I can put off my engagement, because it is only the because it is the because it slow down. Because it is because it is the only evening for some time which will suit her and myself. because it because it is the only evening for some time which will at once start that one over. No, no, sir. She is not 1 and 30. But I do not think I can put off my engagement, because it is the only evening for some time which she will at once suit her and myself. She goes into the warm bath tomorrow, and for the rest of the week, you know we are engaged. But what does Lady Russell think of this acquaintance? Oh, asked an Elizabeth question. But what does Lady Russell think of this acquaintance? Asked Elizabeth. She sees nothing to blame in it, replied Anne. On the contrary, she approves it, and has generally taken me when I have called on Mrs. Smith. Westgate Buildings must have been rather surprised by the appearance of a carriage drawn up near its pavement, observed Sir Walter. Sir Henry Russell's widow, indeed, has no honours to distinguish her arms, but still, it is a handsome equipage. Oh, I'm not familiar with that word. Equipage. I'll try equipage for now. It is a handsome equipage, and no doubt it is well known to convey a Miss Elliot, a widow Mrs. Smith, lodging in the Westgate Buildings. A poor widow, barely able to live, between 30 and 40. A mere a mere Mrs. Smith, an everyday Mrs. Smith. Of all the people and all names in the world, to be the chosen friend of Miss Anne Elliot, to be to be preferred and to be prefer- and to be preferred by her to her own family connections among the nobility of England and Ireland. Mrs. Smith, such a name. Mrs. Clay, who had been present while all this happened, Mrs. Clay, who had been present while all this passed, now thought it advisable to leave the room, and Anne could have said much and did long and Anne could have said much and did little long to and did long to say did long wish, okay. Yeah. And Anne could have said much and did long to say a little in defense of her friends. In defense of her friends, not very dissimilar claims to theirs, but her sense of personal respect to her father prevented her. She made no reply. She left it to himself to recollect that Mrs. Smith was not the only widow in Bath between 30 and 40, with little to live on and no surname of dignity. Anne kept her appointment. The others kept theirs, and of course she heard the next morning that they had a delightful evening. She had been the only one of the set absent, for Sir Walter and Elizabeth had not only been quit. I always get quit and quiet mixed up in my mind. I think that's quiet. She had been the only one of the set absent, for Sir Walter and Elizabeth had not only been quiet at her ladyship's service themselves, but had actually been happy to be employed by her in collecting others, and had been at the trouble of inviting both Lady Russell and Mr. Elliot. And Mr. Elliot had made a fresh point of leaving Colonel Wallace early, and Lady Russell had arranged all her evening and Lady Russell had fresh arranged all her evening slow down. And Lady Elliot had made a fresh point of and Lady Russell had fresh arranged all her evening engagements in order to wait on her. Anne had the whole history of all that such an evening could supply from Lady Russell. To her, Its great interest must be in having been very much talked of between her friend and Mr. Elliot, and having been wished for, regretted, and at the same time honored for staying away and having been wished for, regretted, and at the same time honored for staying away in such a cause. Her kind, compassionate visits to this old schoolfellow, sick and reduced, seemed to have quite delighted Mr. Elliot. He thought her a most extraordinary he thought her a most extraordinary young woman, and her temper, manners, mind, a model of female excellence. He could meet even Lady Russell in a discussion of her merits, and Anne could not be given to understand so much by her friend, could not know herself to be so highly rated by a sensible man, without many of those agreeable sensations which her friend meant to create. Lady Russell was now perfectly decided in her opinion of Mr. Elliot. She was as much convinced of his meaning to gain Anne in time, as of his as of his as of his deserving her, and was beginning to calculate the number of weeks which would free him from all the remaining restraints of widowhood, and leave him at liberty to exert most open powers of pleasing. She would not speak to Anne with half she would not speak to Anne with She would not speak to Anne with half the certainty she felt on the subject. She would venture on little more than hints of what might be hereafter, of a possible attachment on his side, of the desirableness of the alliance, supposing such attachment to be real and returned. Anne heard her, and made no violent exclamations. She only smiled, blushed, and gently shook her head. I am no matchmaker, as you well know, said Lady Russell, being much too well aware of the uncertainty of all human events and calculations. I only mean that if Mr. Elliot should some time hence pay his addresses to you, and if you should be disposed to accept him, I think there would be every possibility of your being happy together. A most suitable connection everybody must consider it, but I think it might be a very happy one. Mr. Elliot is an exceedingly agreeable Mr. Elliot is an exceedingly agreeable man, and in many respects I think highly of him, said Anne. But we should not suit. But we should not suit. Lady Russell let this pass, and only said in rejoinder, I own that to be I own that to be able to regard you as the future mistress of Kellynch, the future Lady Elliot, to look forward to seeing you occupying your dear mother's place, succeeding to all her rights and all her popularity, as well as to all her virtues, would be the highest possible gratification to me. You are your mother's self in countenance and disposition, and, if I might be allowed to fancy her such as she was, in situation, in name, in home, presiding and blessing in the same spot, and only superior to her in being more highly valued. My dear Anne, it would give me more delight than it is often felt at my time of life. Anne was obliged to turn away, to rise, to walk to a distant table, and, leaning there in pretend employment, try to subdue the feelings this picture excited. For a few moments her imagination and her heart were bewitched. The idea of becoming what her mother had been, of having the precious name of Lady Elliot first revived in herself, of being restored to Kellynch, calling it home again, her home forever, was a charm which she could not immediately resist. Lady Russell said not another word, willing to leave the matter to its own operation, and believing that, could Mr. Elliot at that moment with propriety had spoken for himself, and believing that, hmm, 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 and believing that if Mr. Elliot could Mr. Elliot at that moment with propriety have spoken for himself, she believed, in short, what Anne did not believe. The same image of Mr. Elliot speaking for himself brought Anne to composure again. The charm of Kellynch and of Lady Elliot all faded away. She never could accept him, and it was not only that her feelings were still averse to any man save one, her judgment, on a serious consideration of the possibilities of such a case, was against Mr. Elliot. Though they had been now acquainted a month, she could not be satisfied that she had really known his character, that he was a sensible man, an agreeable man, that he talked well, professed good opinions, seemed to judge properly, and as a man of principle. This was all clear enough. He certainly knew what was right, nor could she fix on any one article of moral duty evidently nor could she yet nor could she fix on any one nor could she fix on any one article of moral duty evidently transgressed. But she would not have been but yet she would have been afraid to answer for his conduct. She distrusted the she distrusted the past, if not the present. The names which occasionally dropped off fo- the names which occasionally dropped of former associates, the allusions to former practices and pursuits, suggested suspicions not favorable of what he had been. She saw that there had been bad habits, that Sunday traveling had been a common thing, that there had been a period of his life, and probably not a short one, where he had been, at least, careless in all serious matters, and though he might now think very differently, who could answer for the true sentiments of a clever, cautious man grown old enough to appreciate a fair character? How could it ever be ascertained that his mind was truly cleansed? Mr. Elliot was rational, discreet, polished, but he was not open. There was never any burst of feeling, any any warmth of indignation or delight at the evil or good of others. This, to Anne, was a decided imperfection. Her early impressions were in, her earlier impressions were incurable. She prized the frank, open-hearted, the eager character beyond all others. Warmth and enthusiasm did captivate her still. She felt that she could so much depend upon the sincerity of those who sometimes looked She felt that she could so much more depend upon the sincerity of those who sometimes looked or said a careless or a hasty thing than those whose presence of mind never varied, whose tongue never slipped. Mr. Elliot was too generally agreeable. Various as were the tempers in her father's house, he pleased them all. He endured too well, stood too well with everybody. He had spoken to her with some degree of He had spoken to her with some degree of openness of Mrs. Clay, had appeared completely to see what Mrs. Clay was about, and to hold her in contempt, and yet Mrs. Clay found him as agreeable as anybody. Lady Russell saw either less or more than her young friend, for she saw nothing to excite disinterest, for she saw nothing to excite distrust. She could not imagine a man more exactly what he ought to be than Mr. Elliot. Nor did she ever enjoy a sweeter feeling than the hope of seeing him receive the hand of her beloved Anne in Kellyan's church in the course of the following autumn. Alrighty, I think I will brave one more chapter today, and probably call it after that. I'll probably finish this book in easily less than a month, so I should start putting thoughts on what I'm reading next. Got a few thoughts going around, but I'm not certain any of them yet. All right, let's move forward. Chapter 6. It was the beginning of February, and Anne, having been a month in Bath, was growing very eager for news from Uppercross and Lyme. She wanted to hear much more than Mary communicated. It was 3 weeks since she had heard at all. She only knew that Henrietta was at home again, and that Louisa, though considered to be recovering fast, was still at Lyme, and and she still and was still and she was thinking of them all very intensely. And she was thinking of them all very intensely one evening when a thicker letter than usual from Mary was delivered to her, and to quicken the pleasures and surprise, with Admirable and Mrs. Croft's compliments. The Crofts must be in Bath, a circumstance to interest her. They were people whom her heart turned to very naturally. I'm trying to remember who the Crofts were. Was that the people who took care of Louisa upon her fall? It's either that or it's Louisa and Henrietta. Although I think Louisa's probably not up for travel yet. Oh, the Crofts who rent Kelly and okay, gotcha. Oh, that means Colonel will probably be here as well. The Crofts must be in Bath, a circumstance to interest her. They were people whom her heart turned to very naturally. What is this? Cried Sir Walter. The Crofts arrived in Bath? The Crofts who rent Kellynch. What have they brought you? A letter from Uppercross Cottage, sir. Oh, those letters are convenient passports. They secure an introduction. I should have visited Admiral Croft, however, at any rate. I know it is due my tenant. I should have visited Admiral Croft, however, at any rate. I know it is due to my tenant. Anne could listen no longer. She could not even have told how the poor Admiral's complexion escaped. Her letter engrossed her. It had begun several days back. February 1st. My dear Anne, I make no apology for my silence, because I know how little people think of letters in such a place as Bath. You must be a great deal too happy to care for Uppercross, which, as you well know, affords little to write about. We have had a very dull Christmas. Mr. and Mrs. Musgrove had Mr. and Mrs. Musgrove had not had one other dinner party all the holidays. I do not reckon I do not reckon the haters as anybody. The holidays, however, are over at last. I believe no children ever have I believe no children ever I believe no children ever had such long ones. I am sure I had not. The house was cleared yesterday, the house was cleared yesterday, except of the little Harvilles. Oh, this is Mary writing. I should have checked that first. Okay. That really changes the tone. It really does. Let's try that again. February 1st. My dear Anne, I make no apology for my silence, because I know how little people think of letters in such a place as Bath. You must be a great deal too happy to care for Uppercross, which, as you well know, affords little to write about. We have had a very dull Christmas. Mr. and Mrs. Musgrove have not had one dinner party all the holidays. I do not reckon the haters as anybody. The holidays, however, are over at last. I believe no children ever had such long ones. I am sure I had not. The house was cleared yesterday, except of the little Harvilles, but you will be surprised to hear that they have never gone home. Mrs. Harville must be an odd mother to part with them so long. I do not understand it. They are not at all nice children, in my opinion, but Mrs. Musgrove seems to like them quite as well, if not better, than her grandchildren. What dreadful weather we have had! It may not be felt in Bath, with your nice pavements, but in the country it is of some consequence. I have not had a creature call on me since the second week of January, except Charles Hayter, who has been calling much oftener than was welcome. Between ourselves, I think it is a great pity Henrietta did not remain at Lyme as long as Louisa. It would have kept her a little out of his way. The carriage is gone today, to bring Louisa and the Harvilles tomorrow. We are not asked to dine with them, however, till the day after. Mrs. Musgrove is so afraid of her being fatigued by the journey, which is not very likely, considering the care will be taken of her, and it will be much more convenient to me and it will be much more convenient to me to dine and it will be much more convenient to me to dine there tomorrow. I am glad you find Mr. Elliot so agreeable, and wish I could be acquainted with him too. But I have my usual luck. I always I am always out of the way when anything desirable is going on, always the last one of my family to be noticed. What an immense time Mrs. Clay has been staying. What an immense time Mrs. Clay has been staying with Elizabeth. Does she never mean to go away? But perhaps if she were to leave the room vacant, we might not be invited. Let me know if you can think of this. I do not I do not expect my children to be asked, you know. I can leave them at I can leave them at the great house very well for a month or 6 weeks. I have this moment heard that the Crofts are going to Bath almost immediately. That they think the Admiral Gouty. Charles heard it quite by Charles heard it quite by chance. They have not had the civility to give me any notice or offer to take anything. I do not think they improve at all as neighbors. We see nothing of them, and this is really an instance of gross inattention. Charles joins me in love and every proper thing. Yours affectionately, Mary M. I am so fu- I am so sorry to say that I am very far from well, and Jemina has told me that the butcher says there is a bad sore throat very much about. I dare say I shall catch it, and my sore throats, you know, are always worse than anybody's. So ended the first part, which had been afterwards put into an envelope containing nearly as much more. I kept my letter open that I might send you word how Louisa bore her journey, and now I am extremely glad I did. Having a great deal to add. In the first place, I had a note from Mrs. Croft yesterday, offering to convey anything to you. A very kind, friendly note indeed, addressed to me, just as it ought. I shall therefore be able to make my letter as long as I like. The admiral the admiral does not seem very ill, and I sincerely hope Bath will do him well. And I sincerely hope Bath will do him all the good he wants. I shall be truly glad to have them back again. Our neighborhood cannot spare such a pleasant family. But now for Louisa. I have something to communicate that will astonish you not a little. She and the Harvilles came on Tuesday very safely, and in the evening we went to ask her how she did, when we were rather surprised not to find Captain Benwick of the party, for he had been invited as well as the Harvilles. And what do you think was the reason? Neither more nor less than his being in love with Louisa, and not choosing to venture to Uppercross till he had an answer from Mr. Musgrove, for it was all settled between him and her before she came away, and he had written to her by Captain Harville. True, upon my honour. Are you not astonished? I shall be surprised at least if you ever received a hint of it, for I never did. Mrs. Musgrove protests solemnly that she knew nothing of the matter. We are all very well pleased, however, for it is not equal to her marrying Captain Wentworth. W- We are all very well pleased, however, for though it is not the equal to her marrying Captain Wentworth, it is infinitely better than Charles Hayter, and Mr. Musgrove has written his consent, and Captain Benwick is expected today. Mrs. Harville says her. That's right. Colonel is the navies don't have colonels, if I remember correctly. Captain is their equivalents. Got the rank right, just the name wrong. I'm so used to army ranks. Okay. I did not see Captain Benwick and Louisa getting together. That floors me. Ooh, Anne's not going to like that because I think that's who she was starting to fall for. Okay. Let's see. I think I was in that sentence. I'll go back one just to play it safe. We are all very well pleased, however, for though it is not equal to her marrying Captain Wentworth, it is infinitely better than Charles Hayter, and Mr. Musgrove has written his consent, and Captain Benwick is expected today. Mrs. Harville says her husband feels a good deal on his poor sister's account, but, however, Louisa is a great favorite with both. Indeed, Mrs. Harville and I quite agree that we love her the better for having nursed her. Charles wonders what Captain Wentworth will say, but if you remember, I never thought him attached to Louisa. I never could see anything of it. And this is the end, you see, of Captain Benwick's being supposed to be an admirer of yours. How Charles could take such a thing into his head was always How Charles could take such a thing into his head was always incomprehensible to me. I hope he'll be more agreeable now. Yeah, that really does surprise me. I guess just the presence, maybe be what's the nurse effect? The nurse, whatever. Certainly not a great match for Louisa Musgrove, but a million times better than marrying among the haters. Mary need not have feared her sister's being in any degree prepared for the news. She had never in her life been more astonished. Captain Benwick and Louisa Musgrove? It was almost too wonderful for belief, and it was with the greatest effort that she could remain in the room, preserve an air of calmness, and answer the common questions of the moment. Happily for her, there were not many. Sir Walter wanted to know whether the Crofts travelled with four horses, and whether they were likely to be situated in such a part of Bath as it might suit Miss Elliot and himself to visit in, but had little curiosity beyond. "How is Mary?" said Elizabeth, and without waiting for an answer. "And pray, what brings the Crofts to Bath?" "They come on the Admiral's count. He is thought to be gouty. Gout and decrepitude. Decrepitude? Decrept decrepitude. Yeah, I'll try that. Gout and gout and decrepitude, said Sir Walter. Poor old gentleman. Gout and decrepitude, said Sir Walter. Poor old gentleman. Gentleman. Poor old gentleman. Have they any acquaintance here? Asked Elizabeth. I do not know, but I can hardly suppose that at Admiral Croft's at Admiral Croft's time of life, and in his profession, he should not have many acquaintance in such a place as this. I suspect, said Sir Walter coolly, that Admiral Croft will be best known in Bath as the renter of Kellynch Hall. Elizabeth, may we venture to present him and his wife in Laura Place? Oh no, I think not. Situated as we are with Lady Dalrymple. Oh no, I think not. Situated as we are with Lady Dalrymple, cousins, we ought to be very careful not to embarrass her with the we ought to be very careful not to embarrass her with acquaintance she might not approve. If we were not related, it would not signify, but as cousins, she would feel scrupulous as to any proposal of ours. We had better leave the Crofts to find their own level. There are several odd-looking men walking about here who, I am told, are sailors. The Crofts will associate with them. This was Sir This was Sir Walter and Elizabeth's share of interest in the letters. When Mrs. Clay had paid her tribute of more decent attention, in an inquiry after Mr. Charles in an inquiry after Mrs. Charles Musgrove and her fine little boys, Anne was at liberty. In her own room, she tried to comprehend it. Well might Charles wonder how Captain Wentworth would feel. Perhaps he had quitted the field, had given Louisa up, had ceased to love, had found he did not love her. She could not endure the idea of treachery or levity, or anything akin to ill usage between him and his friend. She could not endure that such a friendship as theirs should be severed so unfairly. Captain Benwick and Lady Musgrove? The high-spirited, joyous-talking Louisa Musgrove, and the dejected, thinking, feeling, reading Captain Benwick? Seemed each of them everything that would not suit the other. Their minds most dissimilar. Where could have ha- where could have been the attraction? The answer soon presented itself. It had been in situation. They had been thrown together several weeks. They had been living in the same small family party since Henrietta's coming away. They must have been depending almost entirely on each other, and Louisa, just recovering from illness, had been in an interesting state, and Captain Benwick was not inconsolable. That was a point which Anne had not been able to avoid suspecting before, and instead of drawing the same conclusion as Mary from the from the present course of events, they served only to confirm the idea of his having felt some dawning of tenderness toward herself. She did not mean, however, to derive much more of it than to gratify her vanity than Mary might have allowed. She was persuaded that any tolerable pleasing young woman who had listened and seemed She was persuaded that any tolerable pleasing young woman who had listened and seemed to feel for him would have received the same compliment. He had an affectionate heart. He must love somebody. She saw no reason for being against She saw no reason against their being happy. Louisa had fine naval fever to begin with, and they would soon grow more alike. He would gain cheerfulness, and she would learn to be an enthusiast for Scott and Lord Byron. Nay, that was probably learnt already. Of course they had fallen in love over of course they had fallen in love over poetry. The idea of Louisa Musgrove turned into a person of lit the idea of lit the idea of Louisa Musgrove turned into a person of literary taste and sentimental reflection was amusing, but she had no doubt of it being so. That day at Lyme, the fall from the cob might influence her health, her nerves, her courage, her character to end. The day at Lyme, the fall from the cob, might influence her health, her nerves, her courage, her character to the end of her life, as thoroughly as it appeared to have influenced her fate. The conclusion of the whole was, that if the women who had been sensible of Captain Wentworth's merits could be allowed to prefer another man, there was nothing in the engagement to excite lasting wonder, and if Captain Wentworth lost no friend by it, certainly nothing to be regretted. No, it was not regret which made Anne's heart beat in spite of herself, and brought the color into her cheeks when she thought of Captain. Whew. No, no, it was not the regret which made Anne. It was not the regret which made Anne's. No, it was not the regret which made Anne's heart beat in spite of herself, which brought the color into her cheeks when she thought of Captain Wentworth unshackled and free. She had some feelings which she was ashamed to investigate. They were too much like joy, senseless joy. She longed to see the Crofts, but when the meeting took place, it was evident that no rumor of the news had yet reached them. The visit of ceremony was paid and returned, and Louisa Musgrove was mentioned, and Captain Benwick too, without even half a smile. The Crofts had placed themselves in lodging in Gay Street, perfectly to Sir Walter's satisfaction. He was not at all ashamed of the acquaintance, and did, in fact, think and talk a great deal more than the Admiral ever thought or talked about him. The Crofts knew quite as many people in Bath as they wished for, and considered their intercourse with the Elliots as a mere matter of form, and not in the least likely to afford them in any and not in the least likely to afford them any pleasure. They had brought with them their country habit of being almost always together. He was ordered to walk, to keep off the gout, and Mrs. Croft seemed to go shares with him in everything, and to walk for her life to do him good. Anne saw them wherever she went. Lady Russell took her out in her carriage almost every morning, and she never failed to think of them, and never failed to see them. Knowing their faili- Knowing their feelings as she did, it was a most attractive picture of happiness to her. She always watched them as long as she could, delighted to fancy she understood what they might be talking of, as they walked along in happy independence, or equally delighted to see the Admiral's hearty shake of the hand when he encountered an old friend, and observe their eagerness of conversation when occasionally forming into a little knot of the navy, Mrs. Croft looking as intelligent and keen as any of the officers around her. Anne was too much engaged with Lady Russell to be often walking herself, but it so happened that one morning, about a week or 10 days after the Crofts' arrival, it suited her best to leave her friend, or her friend's carriage, in the lower part of the town, and return alone to Camden Place, and in walking up Milson Street, she had the good fortune to meet with the Admiral. He was standing by himself at a print shop window, with his hands behind him, in earnest contemplation of some print, which she might not own, and she not only might have passed him unseen, but was obliged to touch as well as address him before she could catch his notice. When he did perceive and acknowledge her, however, it was done with all his usual frankness and good humor. "Ah, is that you? Thank you, thank you. This is treating me like a friend. Here I am, you see, staring at a picture. I can never get by this shop without stopping. But what a thing here but what a thing here is by way of a boat. Do look at it. Did you ever see the like? What queer fellows your fine painters must be to think anybody would venture their lives in such a shapeless old cockshell as that. And yet, here are two gentlemen stuck up in it mightily as their ease. And yet, here are two gentlemen stuck up in it mightily at their ease, and looking about them at the rocks and mountains, as if they were not upset the next moment, which they certainly must be. I wonder where the boat I wonder where that boat was built, laughing heartily. I would not venture a horse pond on it. Eh, I would not venture I would not venture over a horse pond in it. Well, turning away, now, where are you bound? Can I go anywhere for you or with you? Can I be of any use? None, I thank you, unless you will give me the pleasure of your company the little way our roads lie together. I am going home. That I will, with all my heart, and farther too. Yes, yes, we will have a little snug walk together, and I have something to tell you as we go along. There, take my arm. That's right. I do not feel comfortable if I have not a woman there. Lord, what a boat it is. Taking one last look at the picture as they began to be in motion. Taking one last look at the picture as they began to be in motion. Did you say you had something to tell me, sir? Yes, I have. Presently. But here comes a friend, Captain Bridgeton. I should only say, how do you do, as we pass, however. I shall not stop. How do you do? Bridgeton stares to see anybody with Bridgeton stares to see anybody with me but my wife. She, poor soul, is tied by the leg. She has a blister on one of her heels, as large as a three-piece shilling. If you look across the street, you will see Admiral Brand. Bit more of a pause there. Oh, if you look across the street, you will see Admiral Brand coming down, and his brother. Shabby fellows, both of them. I am glad they are not on this side of the way. Sophie cannot bear them. They played me a pitiful trick once. Got away some of my best men. I shall tell you the whole story another time. There comes Sir Archibald Drew and his grandson. Look, he sees us. He kisses his hand to you and takes you for my wife. Ah, the peace has come too soon for that yonker. Ah, the peace has come too soon for that yonker. Poor old Sir Archibald. How do you like Bath, Miss Elliot? It suits us very well. We are always meeting with some old friend or other, the streets full of them every morning, sure to have plenty of chat, and then we get away from them all and shut ourselves into our lodgings, and draw on our chairs, and are as snug as if we were at Kellynch. Aye, or as we used to even be at North Yarmouth and Deal. Deal? Or as we used to be even at North Yarmouth and Deal. We do not like our lodgings for the worse, I can tell you, for putting us in mind of those we had at North Yarmouth. The wind blows through one of the cupboards just in the same way. When they had gotten a little farther, Anne ventured to press again for what he had to communicate. She had hoped, when clear of Milsom Street, to have her curiosity gratified, but she was still obliged to wait, for the Admiral had made up his mind not to begin till they had gained the greater space and quiet of Belmont, and she was not really Mrs. Croft, She must let him, and as she was not really Mrs. Croft, she must let him have his own way. As soon as they were fairly ascending Belmont, he began. Well, now you shall hear something that will surprise you. But first of all, you must tell me the name of the young lady I am going to talk about. That young lady, you know, that we have all been so concerned about. The Miss Musgrove, that all this has been happening to. Her Christian name, I always forget her Christian name. Anne had been, Anne had been ashamed to appear to comprehend so soon as she really did, but now she could safely suggest the name of Louisa. Aye, Miss Louisa Musgrove, that is the name. I wish young ladies had not such a number of fine Christian names. I should never be out if they were all Sophies or something of that sort. Well, this Miss Louisa, we all thought, you know, was to marry Frederick. He was courting her he was courting her week after week. The only wonder was what they could be waiting for till the business at Lyme came. Indeed, it was clear enough that they must wait till her brain was set to right. But even then, there was something odd in their way of going on, and instead of staying at Lyme, he went off to Plymouth, and then he went off to see Edward. When we came back from Minehead, he was gone down to Edward's, and there he has been ever since. We have seen nothing of him since November. Even Sophie could not understand it. But now, the matter has taken the strangest turn of all, for this young lady, this same Miss Musgrove, instead is going to marry Frederick, is to instead of the same Miss Musgrove, instead of to being instead of to being instead of being to marry Frederick, is to marry James Benwick. You know James Benwick. A little. I am a little acquainted with Captain Benwick. Well, she is to marry him. Nay, most likely they are married already, for I do not know what they should wait for. I thought Captain Benwick a very pleasing young man, said Anne, and I understand that he bears an excellent character. Oh, yes, there is not a word to be said against James Benwick. He is only a commander, it is true, made last summer, and they and these are bad times for getting on, but he has had but he has not another fault that I know of. An excellent, good-hearted fellow, I assure you. A very active, zealous officer too, which is more than you which is more than you would think for, perhaps, for that sort of manner which for that s- for that soft m- which is more than you would think for, perhaps, for that soft sort of manner does not do him justice. Indeed, you are mistaken there, sir. I should never augur want a spirit from Captain Benwick's manner. I thought them particularly pleasing, and I will answer for it that they will and I will answer for it, yeah, and I will answer for it that they would generally please. Well, ladies are the best judges, but James Benwick is rather too piano for me. Too piano? Too piano? Mezzo piano. Mezzo. Okay, like the dynamic mezzo piano. But James Benwick is rather too piano for me. Mezzo piano. Is it mezzo piano or mezzo piano? Piano, I think. But James Benwick is rather too piano for me, though very likely it is all our though very likely it is all our partiality. Sophie and I cannot help thinking Frederick's manners better than his. There is something about Frederick more to our taste. Anne was caught. She had only meant to oppose the she had only meant to oppose the too common idea of spirit and gentleman. She had only meant to oppose the too common idea of spirit and gentleness being incompatible with each other, not at all to represent Captain Benwick's manners as the very best that could possibly be, and after a little hesitation, she was beginning to say, I was not entering into any comparison of the two friends, but the Admiral interrupted her with, and the thing is certainly true. It is not a mere bit of gossip. We have it from Frederick himself. His sister had a letter from him yesterday, which he tells us of it, as he had just. Oh, he. How does Frederick tell you that? Is he here? And the thing is certainly true. It is not a mere bit of gossip. We have had it from Frederick himself. His sister had a letter from him yesterday, in which he tells us of it, and he just had in it, and he just had it in a letter from Harville, written upon the spot from Uppercross. I fancy they are all at Uppercross. Okay, his sister is here. He's not here. I was like, ooh, Frederick's coming back, but looks like that'll be future still. This was an opportunity which Anne could not resist. She said, therefore, I hope, Admiral, I hope there is nothing in the style of Captain Wentworth's letter to make you and Mrs. Croft particularly uneasy. It did certainly seem, last autumn, as if there were an attachment between him and Louisa Musgrove, but I hope it may be understood to have worn out on each side equally, and without violence. I hope his letter does not breathe the spirit of an ill-used man. Not at all, not at all. There is not an oath or a murmur from beginning to end. Anne looked down to hide her smile. No, no. Frederick is not a man to whine and complain. He has too much spirit for that. If the girl likes another man better, it is very fit she should have him. Certainly. But what I mean is that I hope there is nothing in Captain Wentworth's manner of writing to make you suppose that he thinks himself ill-used by his friend, which might appear, you know, without its being absolutely said. I should be very sorry that such a friendship as has subsisted between him and Captain Benwick should be destroyed, or even wounded, by a circumstance of this sort. Yes, yes, I understand you. But there is nothing at all of that sort. Almost to the end. Push on. Yes, yes, I understand you. But there is nothing at all of that nature in the letter. He does not give the least fling at Benwick, does not so much as say, I wonder at it. I have a reason of my own for wondering at it. No, you would not guess, from his way of writing, that he has ever thought of this Miss... what's her name? For himself. He is very handsomely... He very handsomely hopes that they will be happy together, and there is nothing very unforgiving in that, I think. Anne did not receive the perfect conviction which the Admiral meant to convey, but it would have been useless to press the inquiry farther. She, therefore, satisfied herself with commonplace remarks or quiet attention, and the Admiral had it all his own way. Poor Frederick, said he at last. Now we must begin all over again with somebody else. I think we must get him to Bath. Sophie must write and beg him to come to Bath. Here are pretty girls enough, I am sure. It would be of no use to go to Uppercross again, for that other Miss Musgrove, I find, is bespoke by her cousin, the young parson. Do you not think, Miss Elliot, we had better try to get him to Bath? Oh, well, Anne would love that. I'm going to guess that's where probably the story is going to be headed. Okay, so did I get it mixed up on... So, I can't remember his name, but I thought the parson was after Louise initially. Was it Henrietta? I might just be getting the two names mixed up, because I am notoriously bad with names. So wonder I remember my own at times. Well, we will wrap up there for today, and I think there's 12 chapters. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So 2 or 3 more sessions, I think, will finish it. I really need to start deciding what I'm going to be reading next. Well, for anyone who's watched this far, I appreciate it, and I'll see you next time. Where's my mouse?